Hey guys, welcome back to I Am Movies. Today we're looking into the 2024 American action comedy film, titled The Fall Guy. But before we jump into the details, be aware there are spoilers. Now let's get right into it. The movie begins on a film production set where we meet Colt Seavers, a Hollywood stunt double for the famous action star Tom Ryder. Colt is a professional in the game, known for doing some of the most daring stunt tasks ever. Amidst this, Colt is deeply committed to his love affair with his longtime girlfriend Jody Moreno, who works as a camera operator. One day, Tom Ryder and movie producer Gail Meyer ask Colt to retake a falling scene. Shortly after, Colt gets strapped in for the fall stunt scene. However, it all goes wrong and Colt ends up with severe back injuries that land him in the hospital. Shortly after Colt's recovery, he decides to distance himself from Jody, even though she tries her best to be there for him. 18 months later, Colt, who has fully recovered from the incident, now works as a valet for a Mexican restaurant. One day, Colt gets a surprise call from Gail, who convinces him to come work for her on a movie set in Sydney. Although reluctant, Colt finally agrees to take the job after hearing Jody is the movie director, and that she specifically asked for him. The next day, Colt gets on a plane to Sydney, and upon arriving at the movie location, his face gets scanned using a machine. Curious, Colt asks Venti, a VFX professional, why he had to get his face scanned, and she explains that the scan will be used for face exchange for stunt doubles. Later, Colt meets with his friend Dan Tucker, the stunt coordinator, who briefs him about the kind of daunting stunts he will be performing. However, Colt seems to be more focused on seeing Jody and is even more concerned about not messing up his stunts in front of her. Colt observes the soil texture of the site as he prepares to do a car roll stunt. At this point, Nigel, Jody's assistant, tells her that they now have a new stunt driver. However, Jody, who appears unaware of Colt's presence, complains about having a newbie on her set, but Nigel assures her of his expertise. At the same time, Colt begins to get anxious, but Dan convinces him to give it his best shot. As Colt gets prepped for the stunt by wearing a safety helmet, Jody walks past him to join the camera crew, still unaware of Colt's presence. While taking the stunt shot, Jody requests that the driver get closer and Colt accidentally hits one of the cameras. Regardless, they decide to keep rolling, and Colt perfectly completes the car crash stunt. Moments later, Jody excitedly walks up to the scene to thank the driver for a job well done. But as soon as Colt removes his helmet, Jody stares at him in shock since she wasn't expecting to see him on her set. Colt is equally left in shock as Jody reveals that she didn't approve him. However, Dan reveals that it was Gail's idea, and Jody asks to speak with Colt privately. Jody pours out her mind to Colt, revealing how disappointed she is. Colt, however, tries to be romantic by attempting to help her fix her hat. Jody rejects his gestures, though she clearly misses him, and asks him why he had come. Colt congratulates her on becoming a movie director, but she walks away as he continues to flirt with her. Jody tells Dan to get another stuntman for her, but Dan reveals that there is no one else. After learning that the next scene requires setting Colt on fire, Jody decides to make him repeat the scene just to punish him, even though he keeps getting it right. After a few takes, Jody decides to give Colt the backstory of the movie since he hasn't read the script. Jody tells Colt that the movie is a sci-fi love story with two main characters, an alien named Aliena, and a space cowboy, the character he currently plays. Jody proceeds to tell a story similar to theirs, revealing that after a short but intense love affair, the cowboy gets wounded in battle and disappears without a trace. At this point, Colt realizes that Jody is only trying to get to him, so he agrees to take the scene again. Jody continues to add context to the story in an attempt to tell Colt how devastated she was when he ghosted her. Jody then asks Colt to say something about the movie plot, and he asks her if the alien and the cowboy ever get to talk in private, but she tells him no. Colt subtly uses this opportunity to apologize to her, revealing that he regrets his actions, but she still makes him repeat the scene just to wear him out. Later that night, Colt confronts Gail for lying to him, but she tells him that she did it for him because he deserves a second chance with Jody. In a turn of events, Gail tells Colt that Tom Ryder is missing, revealing that he got involved with some shady people. Colt suggests that they inform the police, but Gail reveals that she doesn't want the production company to know, because they may end the movie production. Since it's Jody's debut movie, Colt agrees to help her. Gail tells Colt about Tom's last known hotel location and gives him the passcode, asking that he bring Tom back in 48 hours. Shortly after, Colt gets into a truck as he prepares to go look for Tom. He begins to have flashbacks about the wonderful moments he and Jody shared. At the same time, Jody approaches him and apologizes for punishing him earlier. Shortly after, they settle their differences and promise to remain professional on set. Later that night, Colt arrives at Tom's hotel room but finds it empty. Moments later, Colt suddenly gets attacked by a lady wielding a sword, who later introduces herself as Iggy Starr, Tom's girlfriend and co-lead actress in Metal Storm. Colt manages to avoid being hurt but later realizes that her sword is a prop. Colt asks Iggy where he can find Tom, and she tells him about a club where he usually hangs out with a drug dealer. Iggy advises Colt to change his clothes and act like Tom to gain access, since he is his stunt double. Colt gains access to the club and goes to meet the drug dealer Dune, inquiring about Tom's whereabouts. Instead, Dune offers Colt a cocktail laced with drugs, which instantly makes him begin to hallucinate. Dune orders his boys to take Colt to a hotel room, but Colt swiftly fights back and manages to beat up the gang as everyone watches with excitement. Dune escapes from the club and Colt goes after him as he boards a taxi. Still under the influence of the drug, Colt stands in the way of the taxi to stop it and gets knocked down. Regardless, Colt gets up and goes to meet Dune. Seeing this, Dune confesses that he was paid by Dressler, Tom's head of security, to drug him. He then adds that Tom is currently at a hotel named Pendleton. Dune tells Colt to ask for Kevin at the hotel and request a fruit plate as a passcode. Colt arrives at the hotel and asks after Kevin, but he's told is not available. He then mentions the fruit plate, but the attendant doesn't understand what he is trying to say. Soon, Jody appears behind him and immediately notices his weird behavior. Later, Gale approaches them and quickly takes Jody away, making it look like they are in a hurry to be somewhere important. Shortly after, Kevin arrives at his desk and immediately hands Colt the keys to a room. Upon reaching the room, the keys refuse to unlock the door, and Colt returns to get another key but encounters the same issue. Colt angrily breaks down the door and discovers a dead body in the bathtub covered in ice. Colt swiftly calls Gale to inform her about his discovery. Back in the truck, Colt tells Gale that they need to inform the police, but she insists they don't. Shortly after, a police officer approaches Colt to give him a parking ticket, and Colt reveals what he'd just seen to the officer. However, as soon as they get back into the hotel room, he finds the bathtub empty, and the police officer believes Colt is only trying to avoid getting a ticket. The next day, Colt asks for Dan's opinion about the whole incident, and Dan tells him that he believes the drug messed with his head. Shortly after, Colt decides to tell Jody that Tom is missing, but she misunderstands him. Thinking he's about to pitch himself for the main role, Jody tells him that she just realized she doesn't need Tom in her movie, and asks that Colt take his place. With this, Colt swings into action and delivers a stunning performance that leaves Jody impressed. After shooting, Jody invites Colt to a karaoke bar later that evening, and he promises to be there. Shortly after, Gale approaches Colt and hands him a plane ticket to leave the country, stating that something serious is going on, and she doesn't want him getting involved. At the same time, Colt overhears Tom's assistant, Alma, saying something about the studio shutting down the movie if Tom doesn't show up the next day. Seeing that Jody's debut movie is at stake, Colt decides to do something about it. Later that evening, Colt approaches Alma, who is about to walk Tom's dogs, and asks for Tom's whereabouts. Alma tells Colt that she last saw Tom when he and his new stunt double, Henry, were doing a drug-induced shirtless grappling match, and further reveals that Gale had called her to retrieve Tom's phone the next morning. Alma adds that Tom's head of security, Dressler, just called her about it, proving that something important must be on the phone. Alma agrees to hand it over to Colt, if he can get Jody to give her a producer credit on Metal Storm. Meanwhile, Jody grows tired as she waits for Colt's arrival at the karaoke bar, where Gale later reveals to her that Colt won't be showing up because she sent him away. After a while, Alma hands over the phone to Colt. However, two men suddenly use a taser on them and then abduct Alma. Following this, Colt takes Jean-Claude, Tom's French dog, with him as he goes after the abductors. Colt hits their vehicle from behind and later instructs Jean-Claude to bite one of them in the balls. Shortly after, Colt jumps onto the abductor's vehicle and proceeds to throw one of them down. Afterward, Colt gets attacked by the second guy, but Jean-Claude defends him as he almost gets thrown down. Meanwhile, Alma fights back as Colt struggles to get back into the vehicle. As soon as Colt gets back on, the second guy beats him up as they get driven past the karaoke bar where Jody is currently singing. However, Colt manages to get rid of the second guy by using his stunt skills to throw him out. At the same time, Alma angrily kicks the driver out and immediately takes full control of the vehicle. However, Alma finds it hard to apply the brake because of a bottle stuck under it. Jean-Claude fixes the issue, and Alma suddenly applies the brake, prompting Colt to burst out through the windshield. Afterward, Colt rushes to the karaoke bar to meet up with Jody, but he arrives late and only meets Dan, who reveals to him that she already left. Colt tells Dan about the phone, and they invite Venti to help them crack the password. After a brief observation, Venti tells them that it will take 3 days to crack it open, and Colt opts to search Tom's hotel room for the password since he is known to write almost everything on sticky notes. Colt, Dan, and Jean-Claude arrive at Tom's apartment and begin to search for clues. After searching the room for a while, Dan stumbles on the password, and they soon gain access to the phone. After going through the phone, They realize that Tom had accidentally killed his stunt double Henry. Shortly after, Venti calls Dan to check the news, and they soon realize that Colt has been framed for Henry's murder due to footage of him leaving the hotel room. At this point, Dan reveals to Colt that the bad guys might want to kill him, and they decide to prepare for it. Dan picks up an axe while Colt picks a gun with blanks. Soon, a gang of 5 assassins led by Dressler enters the apartment, and they begin to fight. Colt and Dan manage to immediately overpower some of them. After an intense fight, Dressler instructs them to surrender the phone and immediately takes a threatening shot, which hits and destroys the phone. Colt then uses Jean-Claude to distract Dressler and proceeds to threaten him with the blank gun. Following this, Colt tells Dan to take Jean-Claude with him. However, Dressler manages to grab the gun and immediately shoots Colt, who pretends to be dead. Colt gets up to run away, and Dressler goes after him. Colt jumps into a yacht where he soon gets captured by Tom's men. Following this, Tom reveals to Colt that he was behind his accident, stating that he has the power to replace anyone who bothers him. He then goes on to reveal that he intentionally killed Henry because Henry once humiliated him in public by asking if he did his own stunts. Finally, Tom further reveals to Colt that Gale called him to Sydney just to frame him for Henry's murder, explaining that they initially scanned his face to replace it with his in the video evidence. Meanwhile, Gale tells Jody about Colt's involvement in Henry's murder, but she refuses to believe it, stating that Colt can't do such a thing. Later, Jody suddenly notices that Colt has sent her text messages, but Gale rushes to grab her phone from her as she attempts to read it, causing it to fall into her cup of coffee in an attempt to disrupt the call. Back on the yacht, Colt reveals to Tom that the phone was destroyed by Dressler's bullet. On hearing this, Tom instructs his boys to pour fuel on Colt as they attempt to burn him alive. However, Colt manages to get some of the fuel inside his mouth and then uses it to set Dressler on fire as he escapes in a speedboat. Tom's men give Colt a hot boat chase, but he manages to escape to a solitary place where he calls Jody just to confess his feelings and apologize for how he has treated her. Moments later, Tom's men spot Colt and begin to shoot at him again. Colt later rides into an oil rig, which explodes upon impact. Following this, Dressler informs Gale about Colt's death, and she immediately informs Jody about it too. However, it appears that Colt only faked his death as he emerged from the water. The next day, Tom's men begin to search for Dan at the movie location but can't find him. At the same time, Colt manages to sneak into Jody's trailer in a costume, but she violently attacks him and beats him up. Later, Colt reveals himself to her and goes ahead to explain the details of the whole saga. Shortly after, Gale knocks on the door and Colt swiftly hides in Jody's bedroom. Gale tells Jody that she's managed to convince Tom to come back on set, but reveals that she'll have to use VFX for the car stunts, and Jody agrees. With this, Jody and Colt plan to force a recorded confession out of Tom while making him do his own stunts. The next day, Tom gets back on set and brilliantly delivers his role. However, as he prepares to do his car stunt in VFX, his hands are cuffed. Colt joins in from the other side and immediately sets the car in motion, revealing himself to Tom. With this, Tom's entire security team goes after them, but Dan takes them out with explosives one after the other. Later, Colt reveals his plan to do a suicidal 250-foot car stunt jump, and Tom soon begins to confess how Gale had planned everything and framed Colt for Henry's murder. Afterward, Colt does the jump and lands safely, but Tom passes out from fear. Gale manages to collect the audio evidence after threatening the sound man with a gun, and then calls for a helicopter. As Jody attempts to stop Gale, one of Tom's security men seizes her, allowing Gale to escape. However, Jody manages to beat them up alongside Jean-Claude. At the same time, Dan mobilizes his crew to beat Tom's security team, while he takes on Dressler himself. Shortly after, Tom escapes and rushes to get on the helicopter with Gale. On the other hand, Colt also manages to get into the helicopter with Jody's help after attempting a daring stunt. Colt struggles to get the audio file back, but Gale and Tom fight him. After a fierce struggle, Colt manages to get hold of the audio recorder and makes a soft landing. Seeing this, Jody rushes over to Colt and they kiss to celebrate their victory. Months later, Jody's debut movie Metal Storm becomes a huge hit and she ends up reunited with the love of her life. And this is where our story ends. If you'd like to see us recap any other movies or topics you have in mind, just drop a comment and let us know. And don't forget to hit the like button, share this recap, and subscribe to stay updated for the next one. Until next time.